Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of Index Office Hours. Today is the 30th of April, and this is Index Office Hours 155. If anyone is new to Index Office Hours, and as always, I see some new faces, which is always really cool. This is the town square where ecosystem participants come together and discuss the most important and relevant topics for indexers. Today's conversation in particular is an open one, and we would love to hear your voice. So if you would like to unmute your mic and get involved in today's conversation, feel free to do that. If you have any issues, let me know. Otherwise, you can leverage the chat box in the corner there, which many of you are already using, which is pretty cool. So, as a reminder, this is singing is optional. Yes, always welcome. IOH karaoke. There you go. We're gonna schedule that into the calendar. As a reminder, this is something that is recorded and posted onto public channels like YouTube. So if you are concerned about privacy, please bear that in mind. And with that, let's get into today's exciting agenda. So as always, I give a shout out to the latest 𝗨𝗀𝗳𝗂𝗧 episode, and today's no different. And that episode is 116 with Connor Howe. And Connor is the founder of 𝗨𝘀𝗲𝗳𝗂𝗧 Finance. So for those who don't know, 𝗨𝘀𝗲𝗳𝗀𝗧 Finance is providing financial infrastructure for developers to integrate DeFi into their dApps, which is a pretty cool capability. Yeah, he's been in Web3 for a long time. He's been in Bitcoin since 2012 and also Ethereum since 2016. And so, in this conversation, he gives us perspective on Web2 versus Web3. He talks about the current state of DeFi and where he thinks it's headed. And so if you're interested in any of those topics there or in Connor's background, then I would highly recommend checking out the episode there. Juan has posted both the agenda and the podcast episode. So thank you very much, Juan. And with that, I will hand over to Anna for our regularly scheduled Repo Watch section.
Thank you, Abel, and hello everyone again. Okay, today in Repo Watch, starting with execution layer client, we have had a new release of Jet. This is version 1.14.0, which is a major release with a lot of features and some breaking changes. So please do read all of the release notes before updating. But some of the things that you need to know: it drops pre-merge network support, so no longer supports running pre-merge networks, and it only focuses on post-merge network operation driven by consensus clients. It ships with a beacon chain light client that follows the beacon chain REST API of beacon nodes. And it has live tracing features, and there's a few other functionalities, so please do check the release notes. Then on Nethermind, we have a new release. This is version 1.26.0. This focuses on substantial backend improvements relating to state management and sync efficiency, as well as better support features. Some of the performance improvements include block processing times improves by 30 to 50%, state database size reduced by 25%, and state database growth rate significantly decreased. Nethermind also migrates to half path, so existing nodes remain on the old hash design unless manually switched. And it contains a bunch of deprecations, so removal of snappy dependency and several sync options and metrics removed. So again, please do check this release. Next, we have a new release on Cello. This is 1.8.4. This release introduces a bug. The previous release introduced a bug in the effective gas price calculation for the RPC output, so this release fixes that bug. And all fee payments have been correct all the time, so you don't have to worry about that. Then Arbitrum Nitro has 2 new releases. So version 2.3.4 release candidate 3, which improves EIP 4844 batch posting and adds support for Redis stream as block validation work queue compared to the previous release. And then the most recent release, version 2.3.4, release candidate 4, which also improves EIP 4844 batch posting and merges in a new 𝗨𝗂𝗟𝗀 version compared to the previous release candidate. On consensus layer clients, we have had new releases from 𝗨𝘀𝗃𝗂. This is version 24.4.4, which is a recommended update containing performance improvements and also removes the support for 𝗨𝗟𝗃 network. Similarly, Nimbus has same version number, so 24.4.0, which is a low urgency release with stability and performance improvement, and it also removes support for 𝗨𝗟𝗃 as well. We don't have anything on the graph stack, and on the graph stack we have a new subgraph radio release, so version 104 alpha 1, which fixes a database locked error. And this is all we have. Looking into the chat, indeed the get 114.0 is a major release with the live tracing feature. And this is all I have for this week. So over to you, Juan.
Thanks, Anna. So getting to Protocol Watch, we have a few things to cover. Starting in forum governance, we have the GRC2, which is the QoS Oracle v2. We already covered this last week, but there has been a little bit of feedback regarding, potentially doing some breaking changes and, moving away from the original v1 schema. We originally wanted to have compatibility, but it might be a good, moment to break compatibility and just improve the schema altogether, given that it's a v2. So yeah, please provide all of the feedback possible in the forum thread, as we are, aiming to finalize the design relatively shortly. Next up, we have GIP65, which is the Subgraph Availability Manager GIP. The council, as well as the tab, already voted for it, and it's gonna go live hopefully soon. But first, we're gonna be doing some rounds of testing with the operators, making sure that everything works correctly, and ensuring that we don't break anything in the process. It's a nice step in decentralizing some of the oracles, particularly in this case is the subgraph availability oracle, which is always something nice to have, even if it has the downside of having to run potentially more infrastructure, because 5 teams are going to be running it instead of 1. But it's again a step in the right direction, I think. For forum research, we don't have any new updates since last WH. Last WH we covered the core dev updates. For the contracts repository, there's some work again on work in progress for Horizon, mainly Subgraph Data Service and Horizon Staking. But as mentioned previously, these are all pretty work in progress. They're not going to be done probably anytime soon, as this is something more long term. But it's nice to see that there's still a lot of work being put on Horizon. For the network subgraphs, we don't have any new releases, but we do have a small heads up that the analytic subgraph is experiencing a lot of issues. We're working on resolving them. They are, pretty, difficult issues to solve, mainly performance issues causing it to be pretty much impossible to sync. Not because it's slow, but because it causes some weird issues with WASM itself. Probably, they are even hard to debug. So our best guess currently is that it's even maxing out memory or something along those lines. So we're trying to improve that with some performance upgrades. But it's but easier said than done. Hopefully, we can have a resolution to this issue within this week. If the grafting subgraph syncs relatively easy, but again, there are no guarantees yet for this one. We're working as hard as possible to solve it. that's pretty much it for Protocol Watch. So yeah, I'm gonna be handing over to, is Paka here?
He's not. He's got another meeting clash, but hopefully we'll
Okay,
be
then
here
I'm gonna be
soon.
handing it over to Abel for the open discussion.
Amazing. Thanks so much. There we go. We love a good round of applause. Thank you so much, guys, for your section there for Repo Watch and Protocol Watch. Alrighty, now I would love to hand over to Marcus for a announcement, just to remind you guys of a very important thing. So, Marcus, without further ado, feel free to grab the mic.
Thank you, Abel. And I'll keep this short and sweet. The upgrade window is upon us, so I just think it's just really important that everyone is ask others to upgrade process. Everyone's in that process right now. Feel free to reach out to any hosted subgraph user developer out there and see if we can keep on getting this word out there. And then also, of course, as people are upgrading, it's potentially good to remind them about just making sure their subgraph is just in the most just optimized state. So if sharing news about this upgrade is something in your category and your comfortability, that's awesome. But also, if you could share this information too about the subgraph performance improvements, and then also reducing ETH calls. And there's one more I'm gathering as well, and that is the avoiding large arrays. So anything that could be shared on this, that would be great. And I'll stick around if there's any questions here in chat, but I could pass that back to Abel. Yeah, and that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And just before we move on, it seems like we've got a question in the chat from Derek, who asks, curious to hear how other indexes are managing the flood of new subgraphs. It'd be very interesting to hear if anyone has any thoughts on that. More hardware. See a few people typing, so I'm assuming there's going to be some answers coming up. Nice. There's a follow-up there as well from Derek asking about, are you syncing everything that's coming through?
Yeah, and just so everyone knows, we are in Edge and Node working very hard at getting more marketing out there coming soon. So it's just good if you are preparing for subgraphs coming onto the network and to index them. We're going to be seeing more of a trickle starting now into a more of a rush of river rush, if you will, of subgraphs coming in before the June 12th deadline.
Awesome. Awesome. Alrighty, I see people typing on that, and so we'll let that chat thread keep going. And in the meanwhile, I'm gonna migrate to the whiteboard over here. Seems like people are utilizing it pretty well. This is always fun. I last time there was some pretty cool stickers and games. Seems like people are playing Hangman. So first of all, I want to say a massive thank you to everyone who joined for the last session. It was amazing. We we leveraged the whiteboard for the first time, and we got a ton of feedback, which was invaluable for me. I went away and studied, rewatched the recording, studied some of the things that were on the board, and we're coming back again this week with feedback that was based on last week's conversation, which is this topic that has been widely desired from you guys based on that conversation, which is the discussion on index automation. And Mark Andre was the one who brought it up and had some very interesting thoughts. And he had some really good thoughts about just giving a general background on this, where the current tools are falling short, and just opening up a wider discussion that we can have in today's conversation about how we can leverage level up in the automation aspect. So Marc-Andre, if you want to take the mic and just give us a little bit of a background, run us through some of the tools, and yeah, how we can level up so we can open up the conversation. Feel free to.
Yeah, sure. And I think looking at the comments in the chat with Derek mentioning all the new subgraphs that are coming up and how we handle that, I think that comes. I think it's a shared concern about for many indexers right now. I mean, a couple of months ago we had a few hundred subgraphs maybe, and a year ago it was only maybe a dozen subgraphs that really mattered, and now it's much more adding every week, and it's getting very, very difficult to handle this large influx of subgraphs. And right now the tooling that we have in place basically resolve around figuring out the optimal allocation size for every subgraph. But that takes current tooling, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe there's some tools I'm not aware of, but most tooling presume that every indexer index every subgraph on every network, and basically the only question is how much allocation, what should be the size of the allocation, and maybe how many subgraphs, but that's basically all it is. But I think there's many more factors that we need to take into account. Obviously, there's well, before I get to these factors, and something else that is new compared to what we had before, when we were on mainnet with the very expensive allocation and allocation cost, every indexer basically have to limit themselves to just a handful of subgraphs. And right now with Arbitrum, the allocation costs are almost negligible. So it means that an indexer can have hundreds of subgraphs allocated against, and that's very easy and very cheap to do. But now the bottleneck is, well, and assuming that indexers have access to large databases and storage and so on and so forth. But basically now the bottleneck is no longer the cost of creating these allocations on chain. The bottleneck is the cost of the human decision making for picking which subgraph to index. And maybe I'll just share a few things I take into account. I don't think the current tooling currently looking at, and I'd like to hear from the other indexers, their opinion and their ideas, and maybe there's some concept or some ideas that maybe together we could reuse and maybe feed for future tooling to help us. But so I'll describe this be a little bit my workflow to decide which subgraph to index and which factors, and some of the factors I'm using. So first, there's when a new subgraph comes up, I'll look if I'm able to index it. So first I have to do soft chain syncing, and then depending on subgraph, I'll sync a few minutes or a few hours. I have to check, well, can I expect any query traffic coming up this subgraph? Like if it's coming from, is it coming from a reputable project? Something else also have to look at, depending of the source. Well, some subgraph the developers tend to develop very heavy and difficult to index subgraphs. So when I see subgraphs coming from certain teams, well, I maybe have seen them on chain a little longer than the others because I've been burned in the past. Also, and maybe that's something, and then we come maybe into game theory or prediction. If there's a new subgraph, well, what's going to be the total allocation for this subgraph? I don't want to look at what's the current allocation, and all tooling are doing the same thing. They always look at the current allocation. Well, I have to predict, well, okay, how much allocation will I see at the end of the day, about next week, or at the end of the 28th epoch? Because I will size my allocation differently if I expect a lot of allocation. If I expect I'll be the only one indexing that subgraph, well, maybe my allocation will be very small. Am I the first to allocate? And so I have to be very careful about sizing it accordingly. Also, sometimes I will using the Explorer to see if anyone else managed to sync the subgraph. Does it look like it's difficult, or is it going to take a long time to index this subgraph? So I have to decide there. How heavy is it? Is it using a lot of resources? Is it killing my RPC node? Is my database on its knees indexing the first million blocks? Well, maybe I'll just drop it, right? Has anyone just unallocated from that subgraph? Was it a 𝗨𝗂𝗂𝗪? Is it coming, or is the indexer that just unallocated? Is it one of the is it coming from an indexer that is notorious to make bad allocation decisions? So then maybe I'll just steer clear from that subgraph and I'll wait from them to reallocate. And sometimes some factors like, well, is the epoch about to finish, or there's 23 more hours? Because if it's about to finish, well, if I make a mistake, I can resize my allocation very quickly. So that's just a long list of things I might be looking at. But all these things, that what they have in common is that basically none of these none of this information is available on chain or in a subgraph, and we need to look at other data sources, and we need to do some extrapolation and prediction. There's some game theory involved. Maybe there's some learning to do about past behavior of indexers or subgraph developers, and based on that, make a decision. And why I'm bringing this up is that right now, I don't know, I'm allocated around 100, 150 subgraphs. I can't see myself allocating 10x more or the 100x more without automating most of this decision making, because it's as I said, the bottleneck right now is no longer the allocation cost on chain. It's not necessarily hardware, because hardware is, well, I mean, you cannot always purchase or rent more equipment. That's reasonably easy to do, although it can be expensive, I understand. But the real bottleneck right now, the future bottleneck, is the human cost of making all these decisions. So I'd be curious to hear from other indexers what are their experience, if they have any technique or something they'd like to share. I mean, I know I see like the upgrade indexer that is indexing absolutely everything. I mean, that's one solution. That's one way to do it. Maybe not optimal. But I'm sure there's something in between where we can make good allocation decisions using signal that are not coming from that are not on chain.
Fantastic. Thank you so much there for doing a lot of context setting and also sharing a bit about your process and how you do things, your thoughts. Really appreciate that. I want to double tap into what Alexi's put onto into the chat there. He's just outlined his process. So maybe Alexi, if you're open to it, maybe you could say a few words about that.
Sure. I think I wrote most of it though already. But yeah, the process is, well, first I have a filter. Well, I have a script to doing all that. So I will manipulate the whitelists and blacklists of the allocation optimizer to do exactly what I want. And first step is I pull all the subgraph hashes that are on chains that I care about or that I can do in general. I feed that into the whitelist. I run the allocation optimizer, tells me what should be interesting to allocate to. I examine the subgraph, so I would go on to just look if other indexers have managed to sync it. If I see failed indexers, then I just discard. Then I'll try indexing myself, look at how it goes. Same thing, discard whatever didn't pass. And then once most of or all of those new subgraphs are synced to chain head and successful, I run the allocation optimizer again with my script. My script will automatically look for all the subgraphs that I got on graph node that are up to chain head and not failed, put all of that in the whitelist of the allocation optimizer. And it will just give me a set of the best ones to allocate to with the right amounts. And then I send that automatically to the indexer agent API to create open allocation actions. And I just run it and I'm done. So yeah, that's what I do with my magic script. But yeah, if anyone is willing to lend a hand to make that script nice and pro instead of the semi-hacky stuff I got, that'd be awesome. Because I don't have that much time to spend on it. So I just have it at a stage where it's really the bare minimum to do the job and save me time, but that's it. So yeah, that's that.
Amazing, amazing. I also a few folks mentioned would be useful to have some Edge folks come along today to partake in the discussion. And luckily we have a few folks from the team here. So yeah, like keen to hear some thoughts there as well. I mean, Ford asked the question, like basically throwing a question out there saying, curious in what way tooling, sorry, I'm curious in what way tooling assumes index. Where what? I'm curious in what way tooling assumes index every single subgraph on every network. Can you elaborate there for it? I'm not sure if I understand the question.
Yeah, he responded to me in the chat. It says that he kind of clarified what he said around the tooling presumes that an indexer is willing to index anything. I'm mostly just asking to clarify that. It sounds like what you're saying is missing is maybe like some sort of accounting for certain features or certain markers that a subgraph may be expensive or something like along those lines. It doesn't really do any categorization of subgraphs. Is that the kind of thing you're saying is missing?
Yeah, I think that's basically it. I mean, my point is that there's a lot of external factors that the tooling doesn't take into account. But yeah, things like uh, some indexers may not want to index subgraphs that take more than, I don't know, X number of gigabytes of data, or that would take more than 2 weeks to index. These things are difficult to determine from available subgraph or on-chain data, but basically, I think Alex described it right. The process, the current tooling, you need to go through a first pass, identify the subgraph candidates, run the index them off chain, and based on that, take a decision. But it would be great if this whole analysis could be automated, for example.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's worth identifying what is what we can automate. So I agree that there's only certain data on chain and there's a lot of other data that would be valuable, but I don't think it's simply that it's not on chain. It's partially that it's just not available at all. Like when a subgraph gets published to the network, there's no way of knowing what size it's going to be unless someone else has synced that and is willing to tell you that.
Right. So
I
that's
think that's
why.
probably one of the big missing pieces.
One thing I'd
Is
like
like
to
some
throw in there.
consideration of cost. Yeah.
So oftentimes before a subgraph makes its way to the decentralized network, subgraph developers will publish it to the studio. At which point we'll have the edge node indexer that's going through it, and hopefully they let it sync and they test the data before they publish. Although in practice, sometimes we see people publishing before they've actually made sure that it can successfully sync. But there was a tool that I forgot who made this a while ago, but I use this thing all the time. And that gives you a view of how many entities a subgraph has. And that doesn't directly translate to how many table records, but it at least gives you a sense on how many entities are in there. And so we typically, or at least I will typically use that as a general feel for, okay, how big is this thing, assuming that the studio indexer A was able to sync it and B is reporting the data there.
Yeah, that'd be hugely valuable to have some sort of sharing mechanism so we can get some of that more off-chain data, like entity numbers, whatever size of tables, some sort of notion of gas or compute used to actually get to those entities.
Well, I think part of my point is that deciding on the subgraph or picking a subgraph to index cannot, or it's hard to base this purely on the available information. So there's some strategy or some intuition or some guess that the indexer has to make before picking a subgraph or not, because there's no available data for everything. So basically, an indexer needs to take a guess and be ready to change his mind on the next epoch if necessary.
Sweet.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's like a bunch of aspects to this. Like one of them is just getting some of this data that's just sort of lives on different indexer setups, more shareable. Part of it is tooling. There's a bunch of data that is already available that maybe is not easy to access in one place. And so a lot of indexers are probably building things like Python scripts or notebooks or tools to bring all the data in one place so they can make decisions using all that data. So there's like kind of a few pipelines to getting that data to you guys. I definitely want to continue to integrate any data sources that you guys use into the indexer CLI and continue to make that a place that can be a one-stop shop for all the data you need. But of course, part of that is also getting data on chain and getting data into places that's more accessible so that we can then integrate it into the tooling. Maybe like the expensiveness data is something that makes sense to be just shared in some sort of ad hoc way, or maybe even like a GraphCast topic. We can share things like size of a subgraph. It'd be pretty cool.
Yes, I think that could make sense. I think for a lot of GraphCast features, like we find ourselves, recognizing that the graph is actually in quite a privileged position in that it has like a client server architecture already set up, in the sense that indexers as the server have a public, internet addressable endpoint where they can expose data. So for each use case, it's worth asking, like, does it make sense to propagate this as gossip? And in some, for something like POI propagation, that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, for some of these other kind of, intelligence data points, I think you could propagate some of this stuff via gossip, and then, like we operate something called listener radio, which just monitors gossip and allows us to kind of, provide an API to query like what indexers have gossiped about. We could do something like that, but that is kind of, centralized in a sense, because that listener radio instance is kind of like an oracle. Alternatively, indexers can just serve that data directly, right? Like you could imagine something like the indexing statuses endpoint being extended to expose that information, and so you could just query other indexers directly about it.
Yeah, I hear you. We don't necessarily need to integrate everything into a GraphCast. It can just be an endpoint that people can pull, and people can optionally expose it. There could also be some sort of flow where we expose things like that, quick and dirty, make that expose, and then if it makes sense to then integrate it into GraphCast, kind of move towards that direction.
Yeah, definitely.
I want to go back to an earlier part of the chat where Derek, you mentioned you started leveraging QoS data and mashing it together with network subgraph, with the network subgraph, sorry, and your local subgraph subgraph deployment table. That's interesting. I would love to learn more about that. Like how that's useful, what you're using it for, and just more context there. That'd be very interesting.
Is singing still optional?
Why, yes, it is.
No, I'm just kidding. So basically, with the amount of subgraphs that we've been seeing, it's been a little tricky just kind of trying to keep up with everything. And so I've been thinking like, okay, well, what if we take kind of the other route? Because a certain portion of our stake, we intentionally kind of like partition specifically for query feed production, right? A large percentage is going towards what's going to give us the best return on index or rewards. But then there's a small percentage that we'll put 1,000 GRT allocations, because presumably that's all that should be needed in many cases in order to claim the full query fee amount or near full query fee. And so trying to get an idea of which of these subgraphs to start syncing. And sometimes they have signal, but just in my talks with different consumers, a lot of them don't yet understand that mechanism well. And now that there's the edge and node upgrade indexer that is already allocating to these guys, especially ones that have been coming over from the hosted service and they're already at the chain head, a consumer could, in theory, start querying it without any signal, and also never really need to put signal because they do have at least one indexer on there. And so we started to we synced the QoS subgraph, and we were just writing some query, or I was writing some queries, joining in other subgraphs and locally what we've synced. I posted the screenshot up above, which just helps us identify what subgraph produced how many query fees in the last 24 hours, whether or not we're allocated to it, whether or not we've synced it, or we are syncing it, or we haven't started syncing it, how many indexers are on it, just to give us an idea of how many query fees we could potentially earn, knowing that this allocation is not going to produce indexer rewards. It is purely going to be for the purpose of generating query fees. Yeah, so that's what I've been all excited about recently.
Yeah, I mean that highlights a really big glaring gap in the allocation optimizer. The allocation optimizer is purely focused on optimizing for indexing rewards. There's obvious updates we do, or even a different optimizer we can build that focuses on optimizing for query fees. Seems like it's definitely time for that.
Yeah, and with the amount of people, I mean, like we went from 1,100 subgraphs to like 1,800 this month, and so with the sunset coming, or the sunrise, or whatever the proper term is for that, It's interesting because we're getting kind of a flood of new deployments, and it's hard to sift which are exactly have intended usage right now versus who is deploying this because they're just responding to the call to action versus who's deploying it, and it's going to take a while to sync, right? All that type of stuff.
Yeah, and then since they're not really using the curation market in the same way, we don't have the same on-chain signal to follow.
Right.
Yeah.
By the way, I think sunset is positive marketing because everyone loves a nice sunset. It's on everyone's dating profile.
That's a good point.
Sorry, Derek. Payne has already spoken. You've been canceled.
Muting myself.
I love how unhinged this conversation, well, this chat is. It's great. The only form of redemption is singing. There you go. Yeah, as Vince says, sing it and it overrides it. Awesome.
To the sunset.
I love that. Payne, I know that you're also an awesome indexer. I would love to hear your thoughts. What are your thoughts on your automation setup as we move into these next phases?
Wait, what? Am I a good indexer? Today I learned. Can you guys hear me well?
Yes, we can.
All right, so my setup is still pretty bare bones. So the way I'm doing it now, I'm obviously syncing all the subgraphs on the network above 100 GRT signal. So that gives me like easy way to allocate the subgraphs. And the way I'm doing it is basically I wrote a bunch of scripts that parses the entire network once, grabs all the IPFS hashes, and then searches through each IPFS hash in a loop for graph bases, basically, adds them to the list, and then deploys everything by restarting the agents. So basically, the QM hash list is being added on the index agent and vars. So the moment you restart the agents, those subgraphs are immediately deployed. And well, it's pretty bare bones in terms of like I'm not like it's the easiest approach if you have enough storage, right? I don't have to think much. The way I'm doing housekeeping right now is I'm basically, first of all, I'm truncating any subgraph or any bases that I think I won't need in the future. So basically, I only keep the subgraph there with this name, but not the data, basically, so that the script, like it's script friendly this way. So I don't need to keep all the data anywhere. I'm still deciding between this and just dropping all the indices and moving it to hard disks, but I'm not sure if that's a viable solution. I'm yet to test this, maybe this week. But yeah, it's definitely not too automated. Oh, and for allocations, I check all the subgraphs that are like to 100 blocks behind. So basically, anything at chain head is considered roughly 1,000 blocks behind at max. I take the list of that, I put it in the allocation optimizer, and I run it, and that's it. It's more or less automated. I already shared the scripts at some point. I think they're pinned somewhere in the index of software. If not, then yeah, I'll probably share them with you if you need it. But it's not something too complicated. It's mainly just built with ChatGPT. By the way, you can get the GPT do amazing things if you have enough patience with it. I know zero Python, and this thing is, and also decent. Like he's good at Python and Bash, so like you can get him to write you anything that you want. You just need to be very specific and take it step by step. This is how I built my scripts. Like I don't know Bash and Python enough to do it myself. So yeah, if anyone has any questions or yeah, feel free to ask.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Payne. Really appreciate that. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'll also make the space for that as well. If anyone does, then feel free to drop a question in the chat.
I have a question, by the way, for the guy, people that built the allocation optimizer. Chris, do you happen to know if it has a function where it also allocates? Well, it creates those allocations for subgraphs. So, say that you want to allocate to all the subgraphs on the network. Is there a possibility to make it do that? Because right now I'm using some other tool to allocate to those to subgraphs, but I want to allocate to the entire network and just stick to one tool.
Well, there are semiotic folks on the call, I think, and also Hope on the GraphOps team.
Hope is typing, yeah.
Yes. But from my experience, yes is the answer. If you, off the top of my head, if you provide it with a list of, like basically the pinned list, if you set the pinned list to a long set of subgraphs, it should optimize over that list and force, like the resulting output will create allocations for everything. And the ones that are in the optimization set will have the appropriate allocation size. And then the ones that, fall outside of the optimization, I think just have a 0.1 GRT allocation size.
Oh wow! Okay, cool. That if it works, what you how you say it works, then it's awesome. I am yet to take a look at it again, but first, like the only reason why I'm not playing around with it in production is that is because I'm waiting for the smart contract team to deploy a update so we can close allocations within the same epoch with 0x0. This way, I can just play around in prod with my allocations for about an hour and not risk losing anything in the process. You know what I mean? Patiently waiting for that to happen. I've been assured by the yeah. Sorry, I already triggered two people at once. But yeah, so I've been assured by the contract team that it's going to happen soon, Tim. Chat is killing me.
Mr. Test and Prod, I love it. There's a couple. So first, I want to make sure that we have a discussion on query fees because I think that could be interesting. I appreciate you sharing that, Derek. But then I also want to turn to Marc-Andre because I know that you are very keen for this topic. And so I want to turn it to you to ask if and give you an opportunity to ask indexers further questions, or other indexers further questions, or if you just want to check in with you to feel like you're getting value out of this, just to make sure that you're finding this useful. Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I think it's a useful conversation. But to be frank, what I'm looking is something very different and completely different approach, and I could sense that maybe some got a little defensive, and that's really not what I wanted to achieve here because the tooling that we have is great. It's been serving us very well for a very long time. But but yeah, for 10x or 10x or 100x subgraph count, we'll need a very different approach. And yeah, I think I'm still trying to figure out what it could be. And yeah, I think that's still a open question in my mind.
Mark
Gotcha.
Andre, like I just want to, you know, like reaffirm that I really appreciate that you always bring these important topics to the table for discussion. And I agree that, you know, like the tools that we have work well enough, but if we're talking about 10, 20, 50x scale, the problems are just different and the tools need to adapt. How much do you think, because we have like indexer agent today, right? And then obviously indexer CLI speaking to indexer agent. And indexer agent is like the basically intermediates your interactions with the chain. And I think like, what is somewhat key to indexer agent today is it kind of has functionality to put a human in the loop, like with the action queue. You have the ability to like review transactions and so on. And I guess, yeah, I'm curious to get your sense. Like, do you think that we need, better tools that drive indexer agent, but that indexer agent still supports the kind of human in the loop via the action queue? Or do you think, the scale necessitates some system that there is no human in the loop? And do you think that these more advanced kind of allocation management capabilities, like, do you think these should be in indexer agent itself?
Well, where it should be, I don't have an opinion on that. I think, yeah, in the very early days, I think the design intention of the indexer agent was to handle all these things automatically and do everything. And yeah, we're very quickly we all saw that we need the human in the loop to validate everything. That's what that's what I'm doing. I revalidate everything. But yeah, we need to, if not removing the human altogether from the loop, we need to make sure that the agent or whatever else is able to make decisions in the vast majority of the allocation and unallocation decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate we're at the top of the session because I would love to hear from other folks as well. I guess my like personal opinion is that the agent has become a little bit like bloated and like I really like the action queue abstraction and like the ability to, put it into manual oversight mode or but yeah, I think some of the other like allocation management mechanisms and indexing rules and so on, I yeah, personally I don't think are um not fit for purpose anymore. Um but yeah, I guess like we have allocation optimizer, which is capable of driving indexer agent to make allocation and unallocation decisions. So when you say like, oh, I see you're just responding in the chat. But yeah, when you say like, to optimize like for where the puck is going to, like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, Well, right. If you look at the current allocations, well, there are many examples, but one example is a new subgraph, brand new subgraph. There's zero allocation, 200,000 GRT of signal. Well, of course, other indexers will jump in quickly, right? I mean, there will be tens of millions of GRT. So if I just open a small allocation of 1,000 GRT, well, that might be optimal right this moment. But in 1 hour, the allocation will be completely swamped by the other indexers, and it will need to be resized. So there's some educated guess that needs to be made. Okay, well, that's a subgraph that other will index. It's going to be quick to index, or it takes a while. So here's an index, here's an allocation size I'll be comfortable with for at least the duration of the initial sync. So that's an example here. So I need to figure out where the puck will be next hour, at the end of the epoch, and in 28 epoch.
Okay, and so that's like largely the puck with respect to like the indexing difficulty and like how long you're locked into your initial allocation for.
Yeah, that's one factor, but also what the other indexers will do. So if I create a other indexers will jump in, and maybe I need to put a larger in the allocation size on certain subgraphs versus others. If I expect that there will be many indexers picking the same subgraph, or if there will be very few. Maybe another example is some chains are not supported by every indexer. On Phantom, I don't know how many we are, but I don't think we're that much. So on Phantom some graphs, I usually can put a smaller allocation and get reasonable, respectable indexing rewards compared to some mainnet subgraphs where there will be 25 under indexers at the end of the day.
Yeah. I guess that makes sense. We probably don't have time for it now, but I have vague memory that there is a parameter that you can pass to the allocation optimizer, which is like a measure of how quickly the distribution of stake versus signal is expected to return to equilibrium. I know that's not exactly what you're asking for, but it feels relevant to mention. Okay. Abel?
Yes, we're at the drop of the hour, as you mentioned. But if this is of interest to folks, then we can carve out next week's conversation. Maybe if this is, yeah, as I said, of interest, on Indexer Agent and maybe other tools as well that are relevant. Like maybe have a discussion about how those tools can kind of be improved as you know, as we move into the next phase. Would that be of interest? I guess a continuation of this conversation. Interesting conversation. Doesn't have to be next week, but needs to be a recurring theme. Okay, cool, got it. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Yeah, we can definitely put some time aside, maybe on a, yeah. I'll have to figure out the cadence, but yeah, on a recurring basis to discuss these things. Okay, cool. Well, thank you all for attending today's conversation. I really do appreciate each and every one of you for coming along and contributing to today's conversation. And as always, we will be here same time next week for another edition of Index Office Hours. Thank you all. I thoroughly enjoyed the the whiteboard people are very creative. And yeah, we'll see you again next week. Take care, guys. Bye bye.